that is going to make the opening remarks, and then after that I will be moderating you all later on. So with your permission, I will call upon His Excellency Mr. Janis Lamarich, the EU Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management, who will begin with the 3 minutes opening remarks. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, we have entered an age of weather extremes. In only the past few months, we've witnessed devastating floods in Libya, rampant wildfires in Canada, floods and landslides in Bangladesh. And in Europe, the area burned by wildfires this summer was over 40% larger than average. And the list of emergencies goes on and on. From a local to a planetary level, we are living through an unescapable reality of climate breakdown, facing extreme weather events that will only grow, both in intensity and frequency, as the crisis accelerates. Yet, the devastating consequences of these events are magnified in fragile and vulnerable regions of the world, because the people most severely affected by climate collapse are those living in already vulnerable countries and communities. People, for instance, impacted by war and who have had to flee their homes, or simply those facing extreme poverty. Across the world, climate breakdown is exacerbating armed conflict-related impacts, which are the primary driver of humanitarian crisis. Today, as you know, over 360 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, the highest figure ever. To help these people, we urgently need to grow the climate security nexus. The EU has recently strengthened its commitment to this ambition, with a focus on the most vulnerable regions, such as the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. Where conflict and climate breakdown meet, humanitarian actors are often the first lifeline for those in need. And we are reflecting this reality in our efforts on the ground. By increasing investment in disaster preparedness with our humanitarian partners, mainstreaming risk-informed approaches within our projects, and scaling up anticipatory action. But humanitarian aid alone will not solve this crisis. There is a crucial role for development actors. First and foremost, we must build the resilience of vulnerable communities and address the root causes of these crises. This means directing a meaningful part of the funding towards climate adaptation in the most vulnerable communities. This includes making sure that funding goes to simple but effective solutions at community level, such as building dams for water storage, introducing drought-resistant crops, putting in place last-mile early warning systems, and helping communities manage scarce water resources while reducing the risk of conflict over water. As the international community prepares for COP28, it is vital we use this moment to explore solutions. Therefore, I thank the United Arab Emirates presidency for ensuring that these topics will be on the agenda of the COP28 and the thematic day on health, relief, recovery, and peace. Thank you for that. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I call upon Her Excellency, Minister Haja Lahibib, Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Affairs and Foreign Trade and Federal Cultural Institutions, the Kingdom of Belgium. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. First of all, I would like to thank our host, COP28, and the mission of the UAE wholeheartedly for the smooth cooperation and for their warm welcome and hospitality. This exchange is the ideal preparation for the Recovery, Relief and Peace Day at COP28. I sincerely hope that it will bear fruit. Since 2018, Belgium and DG ECHO have been highlighting a pressing topical theme at the General Assembly, exploring the interactions between humanitarian, development and political security issues. Along with others, we have taken up this issue during our term on the Security Council, at a time when humanitarian and security needs were only getting worse, and unfortunately, it is still the case. We are approaching today's discussion in an open and multilateral spirit, listening to various experiences to identify courses of action and solutions. We owe this to civil society and to all the communities affected by the climate, peace and security issues. I'm also looking forward to listening to our esteemed colleagues from Mozambique and the Marshall Islands that are responding to climate change-related challenge daily. We are in good hands today. The tact, expertise and intellectual sharpness of Dr. Hero will allow us to outline some solutions in order to accelerate climate action in fragile and vulnerable contexts and contribute to a package of solutions. The link between climate security and humanitarianism is very obvious, even if some continue to deny it at the level of the Security Council or even in our society. No country is currently safe from the devastating effects of climate change. And for this reason, climate is high on the agenda of this UNGA and the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. As we know, climate change is a risk multiplier that exacerbates existing social, political, economic, environmental, and gender-specific drivers of conflict. We have known this for quite some time now and cannot delay an increased action. Last March, Belgium took part to the first meeting of the Steering Committee of the Climate Response for Sustaining Peace in Cairo. And we commend Egypt for this initiative focused on Africa and its African ownership, as we do congratulate Kenya for the successful organization of the African Climate Summit, at the occasion of which Belgium also made a few pledges. I also had the honor to organize a side event about climate change, peace and security at Sharm el-Sheikh last year, together with Egypt. We note the repeated calls for action from numerous countries, many of whom are represented here today. Security Council members pledged to focus on the implications of climate change for international peace and security is a good and practical example of what action should look like. The following solutions-oriented elements should allow for peace-positive climate action in the run-up towards the COP28. And allow me to name several issues which have been at the core of the Belgian diplomatic action. The mainstreaming of a climate-informed peace and security approach has become necessary. It requires a strong political will. Up to us to give it a boost today, and let us carry it in a strong and broad cross-regional group. Belgium echoes the numerous voices that would like to see a regular, comprehensive reports by the Secretary General on climate, peace and security issues, allowing the Security Council to focus on the most affected countries and regions. We therefore also support the inclusion of climate change language in Security Council products and mandates. In concrete terms, the carbon footprint of UN missions should also be reduced wherever possible, which requires an additional effort from all the players involved. SDGs are at the core of High-Level Week. The acceleration of their implementation is an EU priority. They are interestingly linked with the peace and security. This is particularly true for SDG 13, climate action. Without peace and security, SDG 13 and the other goals will simply not be achieved. We appreciate the approach for COP28, complementing the negotiations agenda with a much more action-oriented approach in a dedicated day on relief, recovery and peace. It is key for COP28 to move from negotiations to enhanced implementation and action on the ground. And we see it is a key outcome at COP28 to build an action package and join stakeholders involved in accelerated climate action and finance in fragile and conflict-affected areas, with a particular focus on increasing resilience of local communities. We really hope that a consensus will be reached on some of the suggestions presented in the UN new agenda for peace, which will be at the heart of our discussion over the coming months. Belgium supports the recognition of climate, peace and security as a political priority and the strengthening of connections between multilateral bodies to ensure that climate action and peace building reinforce each other. This is why our support to climate security mechanism is so important to us. And I want to stress how useful the work of climate security mechanism has been, as it is allowed for the UN to go forward. And on the basis of our discussion, we should be able to make progress by mainstreaming the issue here at the UN, exchanging data, experiences and good practice, of which the CSM is a leading example, support for pragmatic initiatives based on technical solutions, which we will discuss here today. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Excellency. I now call upon His Excellency John M. Silk, Minister of Natural Resources and Commerce, Republic of the Marshall Islands. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Can I speak from here?
You certainly may.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for convening us here today, and especially our host, UAE. We know that climate crisis will hit those of us in fragile context the hardest and the earliest. Providing funding that really works in these contexts is crucial. I welcome efforts to address this challenge. Climate change is only the latest challenge for the security of the Marshallese people. To this day, we face the consequences of a nuclear legacy. We are now confronting the realities of loss and damage on top of that legacy. We know that some isles, such as Elegan, which up to 10 years ago had coconut and pandanus, is now reduced to just a sandbar. We are already responding to such slow onset events and non-economic loss. We are fighting back to preserve our culture. For example, traditional legends from our outer islands have been integrated into the educational curriculum. And we are prioritizing adaptation. We are in the process of finalizing our national adaptation plan, which we have referred to as our survival plan, which will be launched at COP28. We are committed to self-determination and to work closely with our communities communities to develop this plan. Excuse me. But the challenge remains the amount of financial support available and how we can access it. We have small teams and have been forced to choose between applying to 2 donors for major programs, and simply because we have limited capacity to complete the applications. We are working on solutions. In 2022, the Republic of the Marshall Islands passed the Resilience Adaptation Trust Fund. This fund is designed to be an important part of the Marshallese financial landscape as we implement our NAP, or our survival plan. We hope that this trust fund will encourage pragmatic funding and help us move away from project-by-project approaches that are particularly challenging in the fragile context and do not give us the flexibility we need to adapt successfully. We need donors to take a chance on this National Trust Fund and work with us to use it. We expect that there will be an operational loss and damage fund as an outcome of COP28, and it needs to have money in it and not just a shell. For this fund, but for all climate finance, those of us in the fragile context want to see A, nationally determined pragmatic approaches that give us flexibility and enable local leadership, and B, access that avoids placing high burdens on recipients. It should be low-hanging fruit to simplify access to finance if donor countries and financial institutions work together to do so. The Marshalls have done our part in finding innovative solutions to the finance question, including the proposed GHG levy in the IMO. We also look to donors to build trust by delivering on existing commitments, including the $100 billion and doubling of adaptation finance, and to making that money more accessible. Fragile and vulnerable countries are in desperate need, but we are also designing solutions. I hope we can work together to implement them. This is a question of justice for those of us who have so much at stake. Thank you. Kumbaltata.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and I call upon our good friend, His Excellency David Miliband. I mean, you're all good friends, but David particularly is a good friend for Crisis Group, so I call upon David Miliband, President of International Rescue Committee, for his opening remarks. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Comfort, and huge thanks to the UAE for their incredibly generous offer for me to offer you some remarks today. I'm honoured to follow the Minister from the Marshall Islands, and as he spoke about fragile states, I'm going to focus on the conflict states. So I think that's a good compliment, I hope. Just to remind you, 18 of the 25 countries most vulnerable to climate change are in conflict. Those 18 countries represent 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but 70% of humanitarian need. Janusz Lenarczyk told you that there are 350 million people in humanitarian need, dependent on humanitarian aid to survive. 70% of them are in those 18 countries. From our point of view, the COP needs to take 4 essential decisions if the needs of those people are to be addressed. Decision number 1, we do not yet have a proper risk map that joins humanitarian needs and climate needs. We do not have it at a granular level because, to state the obvious, the drought issue in northwest South Sudan is different from the floods issue in southeast South Sudan. So granular risk mapping. Decision number 2, we need to innovate for adaptation because the seed strengthening work that is relevant in drought-ridden areas is different than the seed strengthening work in flood-affected areas. That is a small example of many where the climate movement and the humanitarian movement need to come up much closer together. Innovation. Decision number 3. Conflict states need different delivery mechanisms than stable states. The role of government in a conflict state is different than in a stable state. The World Bank has experimented in 3 places, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Yemen, in using non-state actors, civil society partners, to deliver. But it's the exception, not the norm. It's vital that in conflict states it becomes the norm to use civil society as a complement to or an alternative to government mechanisms. Issue number 4. None of this is going to work without climate finance and humanitarian finance coming together. The foundation of that, from our point of view, for conflict states is to follow the G20 recommendation to treble IDA. In conflict states, it's got to be grants that lead rather than loans. But that's not enough. We propose a 30-30-30 rule that we think is essential to get delivery in conflict states. 30% of all climate finance needs to be for adaptation. 30% of adaptation funding needs to go into conflict states. And 30% of that funding needs to go through civil society partners. That kind of decision rule would drive the innovation and the adaptation that is so essential given the scale of conflict that exists today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency, Madame Reem Al Hashimi, Minister of State of International Cooperation of the United Arab Emirates. Madame, with your permission, I would ask you as our keynote speaker to join me at the podium to give the keynote speech. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was going to follow suit and take the remarks on my seat. So thank you for that nudge. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be able to host you here at the UAE Mission, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm particularly honored to be able to co-host today's session with friends that I've known for a long time, the Marshall Islands, the European Union, and the Kingdom of Belgium, and really lean into this climate action and finance in fragile and highly vulnerable settings. It's also amazing to see such a diverse group of people from different backgrounds here today with us to explore what are the biggest opportunities in climate action. Over the last year, my country has been consulting with a vast cross-section of stakeholders on the must-have outcomes of COP28, especially in this year of the Global Stocktake, when we are required to identify and fill those gaps. And one message we kept hearing over and over again, overwhelmingly, and even in the Security Council, is that climate finance and climate action are leaving behind countries and communities experiencing humanitarian and security challenges. Humanitarian, development, and peace-building actors have all stressed that this is not simply an emerging threat, but a lived reality for hundreds of millions of people, from Central Africa to the Middle East, and just as we heard so poignantly in the Pacific by our colleague from the Marshall Islands. Notably, more than half of LDCs are considered to be fragile, and over half of those 25 countries considered the least able to adapt to climate change are also affected by conflict. You can tell David, Marshall Islands, and I all exchanged notes before coming here today, so I'm repeating what is clearly a very compelling and terrifying reality. The UNDP, the World Bank, and other experts report that these communities often receive 5 times less and sometimes 80 times less climate finance per capita than other developing countries. And even when financial allocation to fragile and conflict-affected communities is approved, sometimes as little as 15% ends up being dispersed. Typically, these settings are deemed too risky, too difficult, too dangerous to operate in, or they face very sharp constraints in overall absorption capacity. And the risk of inaction is grave. We know that extreme events, as we've recently witnessed, such as long drought spells and intense rainfall, often result in higher food insecurity, health emergencies, disruption of livelihoods, displacement, and also increased tensions. Yet during our consultations, we also did hear a positive message that where support for climate adaptation and resilience are enabled, it ends up working. When we collectively provide relief from droughts, floods, and sea level rise, and when we simultaneously also invest in recovery and prevention, communities are less likely to be displaced, tensions over dwindling resources can be alleviated, and extremist organizations face a less desperate recruitment environment. These kinds of investments and interventions can also be transformative for the inclusion of groups like women, youth, and the elderly who disproportionately experience climate and crisis impacts. All of you here today have given us, and will continue throughout the session, provide compelling examples from your own countries and your own portfolios. And we as the UAE want to seize on that hope and evidence base for COP28. We need to be measured, and we cannot gloss over suffering that climate change is inflicting. But we also want to send a message of practical optimism. As we look forward to host COP's first Relief, Recovery and Peace Day, which takes place on the 3rd of December, back to back with the Leaders Summit, I very much look forward to the release of what we're calling a pact / a package of solutions. With this pact, we're inviting stakeholders to recognize the urgency and opportunity of climate adaptation in countries and communities affected by vulnerability and by insecurity. And with the package, we're seeking to assemble a first tranche of actions, from finance to capacity building to policy reforms, programming, and cross-sectoral collaboration that can operationalize the pact and accelerate that much-needed investment in early warning, early action, community-level adaptation, clean energy access, and resilient water and food systems. Next week, I look forward to sharing a first draft of the pact with this group, as well as potential components of that package, with an intention to share and campaign around a final public version by mid-October. I hope we can already begin to populate that pact with the ideas that come out of this group and through this conversation. We respect very much the experience you have on the ground and in the field, but also with the multilateral development banks that are present with us today, as well as the overall larger policy experience that this room contains. And we are very clear-sighted that there is no silver bullet, and that delivering relief, recovery, and peace is going to be a journey, especially given how context-specific and localized each of our solutions must be. I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room when I say that it is interlinked, both the climate and the security challenges, but it need not be an immutable tragedy. It's a challenge where, with enough concerted will and effort, we can offer some of the greatest returns in the entire climate landscape for both planet and for people. And it is our duty to not leave any of them, the people, behind. I look forward to hearing your suggestions and thoughts. Thank you very much once more for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We have now just concluded part one of the program, where we heard from various high officials. And now we're moving on to part two with a moderated session from me, we have just less than an hour to hear from at least 18 speakers. You all have 3 minutes. I will hold you to account for those 3 minutes, simply because Her Excellency has given us a task to walk out of this room to help her fill her package with a clear response that's actionable and focused on solutions that closes the gap. Our focus in the next hour is to address 3 vital points that Our Excellencies opened the session with. And those are 3 points that Crisis Group associates itself with in the work that we have done to accompany the UAE as it leads into COP28. And those 3 areas are how we begin to focus on increasing the financing, to channel that financing into what you, Your Excellency, called the fragile societies, but also, as David said, those countries that are affected by conflict as well. The second area is about making sure that we see better programming and filling in that package that Her Excellency called us to do, to make sure that there's better programming for countries that are in fragile context and where there's the most need is needed as well. And how we, through that better programming, focus on harnessing data and ensuring that the response to what we do is conflict sensitive and is really focused on making sure that early warning and that gap between early warning and early action is closed. And the last piece, and for why you are a testimony to being in this room, is to ensure more collaboration as we work with development banks and national governments to make sure that we can build and get rid of that barrier between climate action and making sure that we close the gap between early warning and early action and early response. So with your permission, I will hold you all to those 3 minutes, and I'm going to open with His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Saint Martin, His Excellency Silvera Jacobs. Please feel free for this second half of the session to stay at your seats. My presence here is to remind you that I am in duress and I will hold you for those 3 minutes as a testimony. Please, Your Excellency, Mr. Jacobs, I give you the floor. Thank you.
Miss Jacobs, thank you.
Please, I sincerely apologize. I sincerely apologize.
That is fine. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to first thank the UAE and all concerned, so I don't waste too much of my time, but I'm truly appreciative to be within this circle of friends. One kingdom consisting of 4 countries, being the Netherlands in the continental Europe and 3 autonomous small island development states in the Caribbean, namely Curacao, Aruba, and my home country, St. Martin. Small island developing states face a spectrum of challenges when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, and resilience due to our small-scale geographical location and isolation, as well as limited financial resources. And I can concur with what I heard my colleague from the Marshall Islands say. As SIDS, we bear the brunt of the consequences of climate change, with barely having contributed to it. We are particularly vulnerable to the natural disasters and external factors that lead to the enormous shocks within our community. We have been in crisis mode ever since 2017. Let me give you a small picture of what my tiny country experienced. Back in September 6th of 2017, we were devastated by Hurricane Irma, a super Cat 5 plus hurricane, achieving 300 kilometers per hour. More than 80% of our homes were damaged, a total of about $2.1 billion, which might be small change for some of you, but a huge challenge to us. The climate crisis is magnifying inequalities within society. Therefore, it is necessary for SIDS, especially SIDS like us, to work towards economic diversification, sustainable development, and, of course, taking our tourism into a more blue economy. A threat of destruction on a massive scale, disaster is ever present from June to November of every year, and getting hotter and starting earlier and ending later with every passing year. It's a traumatic experience for the individuals on the ground. The race in time is to become more resilient. It has become our call word, so to speak. We've initiated multi-pronged approach to hazard management. As SIDS, we have a strong need for relevant data. Therefore, we've established a data management system, but it is still a work in progress. As partnerships are the focus of today, SDG 17, I want to highlight the investment that we have made to create awareness at the community level. So our disaster risk has been really at the NGO, community leaders, and community councils, making sure that they are trained to deal as first responders in aspects of disaster management. We've established or are in the process of establishing a Center for Excellence that will offer crisis management training at different levels and also serve the rest of the region. We have a lot of experience in dealing with disasters. The greatest challenge we face for the green energy transition and towards achieving climate resilience is financing. We must close that gap. A disaster risk financing is heavily necessary as SIDS, being an autonomous country within a donor country, a member state like the Netherlands, for St. Martin, we applaud the consensus to establish the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27. I really wanted to touch base on the fact that we don't have access to concessionary financing as a medium income state, and adopting the multidimensional vulnerability index is key. This report has just been published, and though I'm cut off, I do hope we are able to make those type of changes so that we also can get the recognition in the Caribbean that I see greatly here for our Pacific brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Madame Jacobs, thank you very much for sticking with the 3 minutes. And I turn to the Prime Minister of Tuvalu. Your Excellency, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, co-chairs, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to express my gratitude to the UAE Presidency of COP28 and co-chairs for convening this significant event. Tuvalu echoes the sentiments expressed by previous speakers regarding the crucial nature of climate action in addressing the various impacts of climate change. While it is acknowledged that this event primarily focuses on countries experiencing conflicts and fragility, non-conflict countries like ours also suffer the consequences of climate change and price surge of almost every product. The proposed establishment of a relief, recovery, and peace day of COP28 presents a unique opportunity to garner political commitment and bridge the gaps in action and funding for countries and populations affected by climate change, insecurity, and significant humanitarian needs. Your leadership in championing this cause sends a compelling message to other major countries within comparable economies to actively support the important initiative. Excellency, today we hosted the Summit on Addressing Sea Level Rise, organized by RMI and several countries. Esteemed leaders attended, including the President of the General Assembly, Prime Ministers, and John Kerry, the U.S. President's Special Envoy. The event launched a coalition of sea level rise and existential threats, building on the Rising Nation Initiative. Denmark emphasized the urgency of combating climate change and rising sea levels. Leaders shared moving personal stories, urging global collaboration. Tuvalu fully supports these efforts and eagerly anticipates the development of a comprehensive package of solutions to enhance climate action and finance. This would serve as a cornerstone for achieving significant outcomes regarding relief, recovery, and peace at COP28. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. And I call upon the Minister of Environment and Climate Change for the Federal Republic of Somalia.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank United Arab Emirates for hosting and addressing this issue of climate change. Today I stand before you to address this pressing global challenge that knows the boundary. Climate change is the defining crisis of our time. It's a threat multiplier. To combat these multifaceted challenges, we must adopt multifaceted approach. We cannot rely on a single solution, and instead we must diversify our strategic and support alternative livelihood. Climate change has profound impact of human mobility, while often seen as a negative consequence. It is essential to recognize that it can also be a positive force. People by nature are adaptable. By harnessing this adaptability, we can turn the challenge of migration into the opportunity for growth and development. This is the intervention my country, Somalia, needs now. As a Somalia is characterized among the rapidly advancing country, urban climate resilient program focusing on skills enhancement and employment generation hold the potential to transform our cities into the place of hope. By investing in the resilience of our urban centers, we create hubs of innovation and prosperity. We must also come together to build a community of practice, nature-based solution, biodiversity and restoration, and the ecosystem rehabilitation are not just environmental impactful for a pillar of peace and context of the climate change, particularly fragile, violent and conflict affect countries like mine. The international commitment made in Glasgow, the pledge of 100 million per year for the climate action, must be honored without delay. We must channel these resources into the local adaptation program, designing for quick impact while is not forgetting mitigation action. We must foster innovation and enhancing countries' readiness for adaptation, simplify approval process can be expedited. The capacity of the development, last developed, and the small island countries must be strengthened. We need effective and sustainable early warning system for the climate extremely, and we must scale up for the technology sharing. Engagement with the private sector and the funding for the youth programs are essential. We must localize our efforts, engagement with the local institution to reach hard, to reach areas. Incorporating community resilience and social essential program into every adaptation initiative is non-negotiable. It is possible to design and implement more effective and sustainable climate adaptation by enhancing an holistic approach. We must leverage local institutions, local knowledge, grassroots, communities, women groups, youth, and private sector. Our action should be guided by the bottom-up need-based analysis and commitment, building on past success while avoiding previously errors. In conclusion, the developed countries must share knowledge and tools and address climate change comprehensively with the least developed countries. We must act now and act together. Our approach must be context-specific, inclusive, and impactful. By doing so, we cannot only compete by the threat multiplier that is the climate change, but also building brighter, more sustainable future for the generation to come. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you. I now call upon Madam Cindy McCain for the World Food Programme. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this very important conversation today. In recent years, the number of people needing life-saving assistance after climate disasters has risen rapidly. Our international aid system is failing to protect the most vulnerable communities from these predictable and increasingly frequent events. We are not investing enough in prediction and protection programs or adequately funding humanitarian operations in the aftermath of a climate disaster. Every moment counts for the people living on the front lines of the global climate crisis. So our approach must be to strengthen the critical lines of defense that can reduce the devastation it is causing, especially for communities already caught in fragile settings. Early warning systems provide the first critical line of defense. These programs can be linked with protocols to trigger humanitarian action before a community is overwhelmed by floods or drought. The World Food Programme's Anticipatory Action Program works in this way and currently shields 3.2 million vulnerable people in 28 countries against climate hazards. By 2025, we aim to expand the program to cover at least 5 million people in 40 countries. A second line of defense is offered by the community-driven resilience programs, which restore degraded ecosystems and help protect local agriculture against climate risks. Since 2018, WFP has worked with 3 million people across the Sahel region of West Africa, helping them embrace climate-smart agriculture techniques to support sustainable livelihoods and reduce hunger. This is the way forward, and we need to significantly scale up such programs. Financial protection offers a third line of defense. We need to innovate and use climate risk insurance solutions to help protect the communities most vulnerable to the climate crisis. WFP is expanding our work in this area, and we aim to cover at least 5 million people in 25 countries with climate risk insurance by 2025. We are also committed to scaling up these programs in fragile contexts. Excellencies, WFP applauds the leadership of the United Arab Emirates in showing during its COP28 presidency and focusing on what is given to supporting these communities in fragile places. The meeting in Dubai later this year is the international community's chance to make progress on this critical agenda and support the growing number of people plunged into hunger and despair by global climate crisis. We must not let this go to waste. Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank all our speakers so far for holding firmly to the 3 minutes and for saving me from blushing to intervene when you're making such compelling speeches. I turn now to Undersecretary General, Madame Rosemary DiCarlo, for her 3-minute intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to commend the trailblazing efforts of the UAE in focusing on the issue of climate finance for conflict-affected countries. We understand that the UAE has set aside an entire day for a discussion on this issue. As the Foreign Minister of Belgium said, the Secretary General Guterres, said in his new agenda for peace, he called on member states to recognize the impact of climate on security as a political priority. My department is part of the climate security mechanism along with the Department of Peace Operations, UNDP, and UNEP. For our part, we are working to make our prevention, peacemaking, and peace-building work far more climate responsive. We're now deploying climate security advisors in our special political and peacekeeping missions and regional offices. Our advisors provide analysis to governments regarding the potential impact of changes of climate on stability in the country, for example, movements of populations and the effect that will have. They've also been involved directly in facilitating mediation on such issues as land sharing for affected populations. We're investing in regional partnerships. We have just launched a project with a sub-regional organization in Africa, IGAD, to set up a climate security coordination mechanism for the region. And finally, we are investing far more of our peace-building funding to climate-sensitive projects. But we need to do much, much more, and we need to do it faster. So we really are looking forward to see the outcome of COP28, what kinds of recommendations will come forward and initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I call upon USG Martin Griffiths for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comfort. And I won't use my prepared remarks because I just read them. And
you don't like them, Martin.
If you want an advertisement for Ocha, you know, I'll leave them with you. Now, first of all, I want to thank, of course, Reem and others for organising this important meeting, but more importantly than that, than leading the campaign to get us a little bit closer to climate justice. Thank you very much. I want to say two blindingly obvious things at the beginning, Comfort, and then a couple of things about humanitarian obligations. The first is, as I remember one world leader saying, it's a bit difficult anymore to say that climate is not here. You don't need to be in Libya last week to know that. And scientists tell us that that dreadful disaster, still ongoing, is 50 times more likely to happen as a result of climate. So climate is here with a vengeance. Nowhere in the world is any more able to escape it. And as we've heard, for example, from the Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands, it's here as an existential threat to many places and people. Number two, climate promises don't seem to lead to climate expenditure. And it's not just the $100 billion that was mentioned by my neighbor here. And I know that's one of the big issues that the Emirates is taking forward in COP28. Getting the money out of the door, getting it spent in the places where the people who haven't caused the problem but who need it most, that's the essence, I think, of climate justice, as our Secretary General often refers to it. Now, a couple of things for the humanitarian community. Number one, we need, because we're present in many of these conflict areas, to contribute also, as Rosemary's advisors are, to the evidence of impact on frontline communities, to contribute to it. We're not the only ones, but we need to contribute the evidence that we see, do it with others, and advocate for it. And the humanitarian community is often quite good at advocacy, and it needs to bend it to this arc. Number two, to help produce, I was struck by the Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands talking about the dilemmas of project proposals and applications. And this is a real problem, isn't it? We need to help. I know UNDP does a lot of this in some countries. We need to help produce those proposals for funding, for projects in those frontline communities, and perhaps offer, this is the advertisement for Ocha, offer our own channels for funding for climate money to get out the door quickly. And then finally, as others have said, recognize that we must not be alone. This is as much a partnership project as it is an aid project. That means two things for the humanitarian community. Number one, that we need to work with others to make sure that we have the synergies that can easily make a huge difference. But secondly, we need to bring climate data, climate science, like we have tried to do with anticipatory action, into the warp and weft of our programming, of humanitarian programming. The data is there, and we need to change the way and help our colleagues in the field look differently at programming for priorities which have to do with resilience as well as life-saving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Those are really important remarks. I'll reserve my remarks to the end because I want to now call upon Minister of Environment, Climate Action and Communications, Mr. Eamon Ryan from Ireland, please.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very happy to make our contribution on this really critical issue. We were working on the Security Council with Niger on the issue of climate and security. We've taken the banner on, passed on from the German government, and we're really appreciative. I think it's really important that UAE is taking similar leadership and putting it centre stage. And we're also very supportive of the African Union, we understand, has been working to agree a common position on climate and security in advance of COP, and that too is really important and I think has to be centre stage. I was listening to Dave Miliband with real interest, and I'm afraid I think we shatter some of what he's suggesting in funding mechanisms, because the vast majority of our financing, our climate finance, goes on adaptation. I think it's something like 96%. We tend to be, that's an area we're interested in and have a tradition or a history in. But the really interesting thing when you look at it, at what's actually happening on the ground, is that the tiny percentage of climate finance goes to the most fragile countries. Where does the money go? And I know we're in a debate now, as we come in to create our loss and damage fund, as to how much vulnerability or not is the key thing. I think it's important we remember that reality of what's been happening in climate finance when we come to create any new mechanisms. And I think we can be clever around that, around the kind of, eligibility being quite broad, but the allocation criteria being kind of really backing up what I think we all agree here in this room, that it's the cases where the most vulnerable are in difficulty. I think what he also said, David Miliband, about some of the engaging with local communities, that's very specific, our local civil society organisations, is critical to overcome some of these barriers. And also I was in Nairobi at the Climate Summit, where I think there was very good work in the launch of the early warning scheme to help in that. Lastly, I'll finish on this. I hope I'm not, tell me if I'm anywhere near 3 minutes. Am I gone?
Right.
Okay. President Ruto, I think, has been showing real leadership. I think his speech in Nairobi and yesterday or the other day in the General Assembly, and I've heard him say something that I think is so true. We have to balance global finance solutions with global problems. We need, and that's easy said than done, but I think it's a good principle. And we will need, as we agreed in Sharm el-Sheikh, a whole mosaic of funding arrangements. I think we have to be careful not to be so specific, this one is for that and this one is for that. We need, I think, a really big and broad allocation. And the reason I make that point is because I'm an energy minister. I have a fundamental sense that if we really invest in mitigation, as well as loss and damage and adaptation, mitigation will have, by the development of renewables and efficiency, will have a profound impact on reducing the case for conflict. We will never fight, or you'll never hold a country to ransom over a solar panel. Do this, or I will take it out. Well, I have another one, which is made of sand. We can make these. And I think, and it has different characteristics in this rural transition, it's ubiquitous. It exists everywhere. It's not centralised. I'll finish at 3 minutes. Thank you.
I was going to say you can defy me, but you can't defy Her Excellency sitting next to you as well. It was doing a time for me. Thank you very much. I call upon the President of ICRC, who I believe is sitting next to you. Really nice to see you again, Marjan.
Thank you, Comfort. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I thank the UAE for hosting this conversation and for inviting us. Thank you very much. I, similarly to Martin, will leave my notes because what I want to share with you are some initial impressions I had after taking office last October. Now, it's clear the ICRC works in situations of conflict. It's more the Federation and the national societies that work in situations of natural disaster. But what happens nowadays is that natural disaster comes on top of years of food insecurity, of eroded basic services, and on top of conflict. And we see this in the Horn of Africa now. When I came to Mali just a few weeks after I took office last year, I experienced a deadly relationship between poverty, armed violence, and climate change. And they're mutually reinforcing in a negative way. So we have to somehow be able to break through this vicious circle in the future. We live in a time of scarce resources. None of us has the budgets that we want to have in order to address the problem. So I agree with everyone who emphasized complementarity and cooperation. But what I see every day, and what I saw again in Chad last week, was that we have to systematically invest in supporting basic infrastructure, notably in water systems. And this requires integrated approaches, integrated programming, and the cooperation between the World Bank, the humanitarian system, including ourselves, but also our funders and development agencies within the UN system. Everywhere I go, people first and foremost lack water. It's a public service. It's a government responsibility. We also have to include the authorities. I think if we start from the bottom, what people really need in peacetime, it will be the same thing that they need even more in conflict. And this has to be strengthened. It has to be systematically sustained, and this requires specific investments. We can inform, as Martin said, as humanitarians, because in Gao, where I was, there were not many others. But there are other places where there are stronger partners. A good example is the, let me just mention this, the Goma West Resilient Water Project, where we partner with the World Bank and the European Union. If you have more such projects, I think it could be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call upon, thank you. Thank you very much. I now call upon Filippo Grandi. Sir, the floor is yours from UNHCR. Thank you. It's nice to see you again as well.
Thank you, Comfort, and thank you very much, Rim, for hosting us here and all the organizers. I think Antonio Vittorino and I represent here the agencies dealing with displacement and population and human mobility. So my remarks will be brief and along those lines. And nobody can really beat David Miliband in giving perfect statistics that are very impactful. But let me add that as a result of the statistics that he gave, 70% of internally displaced people and 40% of the refugee population, total is 110 million, are from or in highly climate vulnerable countries. And I think this is an important starting point on which I hope COP28 will also focus, and we know from discussions with the UAE that it will. Which areas need attention? I can pick a few. One is seldom spoken about, is what I would call the legal and normative area. Now, leave aside the much debated question of whether climate refugees exist as a definition. Let's not waste time on that. But it is true that displacement related to climate, especially when it's linked to conflict, generates situations in which protection is an issue and requires expert responses. And we are, of course, available to advise states in that respect. Then there is, of course, the big issue that many of you have mentioned of how we can improve responses in case of disasters, in case of displacement, and so forth. And there I would say, I would list 4 quick points. One is, many mentioned predictive analytics. We're actually doing a lot of work on predictive analytics. The private sector is doing very important work on predictive analytics. Many of you know. I think it's a matter of maybe unifying efforts to be more effective in utilizing, as Martin said, predictive analytics to inform planning and responses. Second, I think responses, humanitarian responses, must be more climate smarter, if you wish, and pay more attention to issues of sustainable energy, of provision of water. I was with, is Anna Bierde here? I was with, yes, Anna from the World Bank and I were together in Chad a few days ago, and sure, she can speak more competently about that, but this is very much where we focused on, a humanitarian and development agency. Then we need to mitigate environmental damage of people on the move. Think of Bangladesh, 1 million people moving not for climatic reason, but causing the deforestation of an entire area. And finally, 2 quick points. One, reducing the carbon footprint of humanitarian agencies, big enterprise, include, and this is for states, displaced because of climate in national climate plans and support states which do that. And finally, important, we had the honor, Rim, of organizing the visit of the COP28 Director General to Dadaab refugee camp just a few days ago. The lesson learned, listen to those affected and give them a voice at COP as well. Thank you.
That's an excellent point to end on. Thank you very much, Filippo. And I now call upon Her Excellency Minister of State for Development, Francophonie and International Partnerships, France. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci beaucoup, Mesdames et Messieurs, Excellences. It's difficult to speak after you, no? I'd like to share with you a few key priorities for France for COP28. I think that we all agree that we need more solidarity, but we need more finance. And as we collectively said on the Paris Summit in June for a new global financing pact, we don't have to choose that they don't have to choose between tackling poverty and tackling climate change. This is not possible, and what is happening, that countries and people, they are afraid that if we pay the climate, we leave behind the poverty. So we have also to change the narrative and to say it is the same battle. So we have to unlock money, and just to say that France does more than it is fair share with 7.6 billion euros of climate finance last year. This is a 25% increase from 2021, but 1/3 of this is dedicated on adaptation. The European Union also does more than its part with 23 billion euros of climate finance. And you know that this week in New York, we are proud to announce that we will invest 1.6 billion euros in the GSF. But why I say all of this? Because all these pledges, that they are very important, they are not going to resolve the problem. That means we need to reform the global financial architecture. This is, we have to have the courage not only to accept, but also to take decision. So that's why I think in this case, we have to tackle vulnerability and to support fragile and conflict-affected states. Like all of you, I am deeply concerned by the negative impact of climate change on international peace and security. I was everywhere in Africa, in 25 countries. So in France, we support a UN-wide approach to the climate security nexus and embarking every actor from the Security Council to specialist UN agencies. We co-chair with Germany the steering committee of the UN Climate Security Mechanism, and I call here the member state to join this collective effort. And of course, we deploy climate, peace and the security experts on the ground, like for example in Iraq in support of UNAMI.
Watch out for this lady.
Yes, I didn't see you.
No,
I did
exactement.
Très bien. Okay. So we make, if I can say, we make a lot of things for the vulnerabilities, for cross. What I'm waiting from COP28, more courage from all of us.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for ending on that note. And I called upon DG Antonio Victorino from IMO. Please, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting IOM to be here today. It's always very comfortable to speak after Filippo because he says exactly what I wanted to say, and so you can save time. I have 3 messages, so 3 minutes, 1 minute per message if I'm not wrong. First message, as Filippo has demonstrated, the huge impact of climate change and environmental degradation in forcing people to be displaced is not something that is going to happen in 2030 or 2040. It's happening now, and we need to act now. And therefore, we need to find the most operational solutions. And in our experience, from our view, the most effective operational solutions are the ones who are locally shaped and locally led. So there is no silver bullet. And you need to work with the communities to find the answers. You don't bring the answers. They are the ones who can find the answers in order to strengthen the resilience to climate change. That is critical because they are the ones who are in the front line, and they are the ones who have to take on board the task of adapting to climate change. But having said that, of course, in some cases, this is not possible. And in those cases where this is not possible, movement will be unavoidable. And we need also to focus on the populations that are forced to move because of climate change. And there you have two messages. So let's be clear, migration, mobility is only a last resort. Third message, and last one, I promise. I think that we need to discuss not just the need for more money. Of course there is a need for more money. But it's not just a question of quantity. It's not just a question of the volume. We need to diversify the sources. We need to be more innovative in terms of financing mechanisms. And we need also to change the criteria. I'm sorry. Everybody complains that it is very difficult to accede to funding. And it's a bureaucratic burden, and the criteria are not fit for purpose. You cannot just rely on national criteria on GDP per capita if the action is going to be focused on local areas. You need to make things match the criteria and the targets that we look after. This goes along with the restructure of the international financial and architecture. To conclude, I hope that mobility, human mobility, will be kept on the radar of COP28. That has been a major achievement of COP27. We rely on you, UAE, to get it done. Thank you.
You get an additional applause for me for coming in just under 3 minutes. Thank you very much. And I call upon the Principal Secretary of Foreign Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs from Kenya. Please take the floor, sir.
We commend the United Arab Emirates for its leadership and for convening us. Our region, the Horn of Africa region, faces extreme weather events, including prolonged drought, devastating floods, storms, and many other climate-related shocks that multiply the risks faced by communities and states. Recognizing these risks, the heads of states of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development have endorsed the decision to establish a regional climate security coordination mechanism in collaboration with the United Nations Office of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to the Horn of Africa. It is the first regional climate security mechanism in the world aimed at assessing climate-related risks to peace and security, coordinating solutions to manage them, and channeling finance to the most fragile and climate-vulnerable parts of the region. The government of Kenya welcomes the UN's decision to establish the first regional UN Climate Peace and Security Hub in Nairobi to support the operationalization of the IGAD regional mechanism. This regional hub will be the first implementation of the UN Secretary General's recommendation in the new Agenda for Peace to establish new joint regional hubs on climate peace and security to connect national and regional experiences, provide technical advice to member states, and help accelerate progress on this agenda. IGAD member states' ambition to address climate, peace, and security must now be matched in finance and investment. The Climate Center of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement at its Hague Roundtable in March 23 stated the more fragile a country is, the less climate finance, including for adaptation and resilience, it has historically received. Indeed, evidence adduced at the roundtable suggests that extremely fragile states average just over $2 per person in adaptation financing compared to $162 for non-fragile states. To address the challenge of climate finance for peace to fragile and conflict states, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, on several occasions called for urgent reforms of the international financial architecture, including the multilateral development banks, to make them more fit for purpose. Kenya recently rallied the African continent at the Africa Climate Summit to further champion the reforms of MDBs. Indeed, fragile states should be supported to effectively implement domestic policies that build climate resilience, including scaling up investment on climate resilient systems and climate positive growth. We hope to carry this message to COP28 and beyond in order to unlock climate finance to address fragility, conflict, food security, adaptation, and climate-related challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And I call upon the World Bank Managing Director of Operations. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And let me join others to express how glad I am to be here, and also really commend and congratulate the UAE President Delegate and the COP partnership team for prioritizing climate action in fragile and vulnerable countries at the COP28. As others have said, this is really a crucial area to highlight. And others have also used the statistics. I won't repeat them, but I will say that we have, of course, also added to some of the research coming out on what it means to be both, either or both, fragile and conflict affected and exacerbated by climate, and it is something that definitely warrants all of our attention. What we also are very much paying attention to is the fact that there's just very little money going to this. So just one number I wanted to leave you with: in 2020, per capita climate adaptation spending in fragile and conflict-affected countries was 2/3 of spending in other low-income countries. Neither number is good, frankly. $4.85 in fragile and conflict-affected countries, and $7.17 in low-income countries. Neither number is good, but add to that these countries are affected by fragility and conflict. So we need to work together on this. You will know that we have introduced a country climate and development report. Actually, one of the first set of countries we did this report for were 5 countries in the Sahel. And what we found there is that the annual GDP for Chad, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania could be reduced by 7 to 12% by 2050 without proper climate adaptation. So this is real. These economies are fragile to begin with, and climate makes them so much more fragile. I have examples I wanted to share, but I know we don't have much time, so I'm going to move on. But there are actually solutions. We have good examples from Central African Republic, from Burundi, and from Chad, where, as Filippo mentioned, we were just there together. I did want to emphasize the fact that the World Bank looks forward to very much being part of the events at the COP28. And before I close, I want to also leave you with a broader number that actually is, for me, something we need to all keep in mind. In 2019-2020, the average global climate financing flows in the world that went to Africa was 3% of the total global average. 3% of climate finance went to Africa. So if there's one thing we need to work on together, it's to make sure the continent that didn't cause it, but is bearing the brunt of it, we need to really focus on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, we have 8 speakers left. At the headline of our 8th speaker, I call upon our friend from Switzerland, His Excellency Thomas Gruber, Deputy Secretary State of Swiss Federal Department, Foreign Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comfort. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to sincerely thank the UAE, the EU, Belgium, and the Marshall Islands for organizing this important event in cooperation with the UN Climate Security Mechanism, as well as the COP28 UAE presidency. Switzerland is looking forward to playing an active role in shaping a truly effective package of solutions on climate, peace, and security. Addressing climate change, peace and security is one of our priorities as an elected member of the Security Council. And in this respect, we greatly appreciate the close and productive partnership with the co-hosts of this event. I would like to highlight 4 brief points that we feel are particularly important for this conversation. Firstly, climate change has to become more conflict sensitive. In international development cooperation, the concept of conflict-sensitive program management has been applied for many years now, and there is a lot of knowledge to draw from. At the same time, humanitarian, development, and peace-building finance, as well as private sector investments, should become more climate-sensitive in order to have long-lasting and sustainable impacts. Secondly, climate-affected countries and communities still struggle to access climate finance. This has to change. As for climate adaptation, we believe that existing funds, such as the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, or the LDC Fund, could be better harnessed by the following measures. For instance, climate funds should make greater efforts in terms of providing so-called readiness support to fragile and conflict-affected countries so that projects could be approved and implemented in these contexts more readily. Secondly, climate funds have a somewhat mixed record as regards conflict-sensitive program management, and we could collectively press them to do better in this respect. At the COP28, the Loss and Damage Fund will be put in motion, and member states are invited to make recommendations as to how other funding mechanisms can be better leveraged to respond to loss and damage. Some such arrangements are already up and running. In our view, improving their effectiveness and efficiency would in some cases provide a fast, pragmatic and therefore preferred option to scale up loss and damage finance. Thirdly, technological solutions are key to identifying risks and allowing for preventive measures. Switzerland supports the Climate Risk and Early Warning System initiative, which provides a funding mechanism to especially address the needs of LDCs and SITs. And we also support the Early Warning System for All initiative. We've made extremely positive experiences with both of those technologically driven initiatives. Moreover, we should all place greater emphasis on data-based insurance schemes or initiatives, such as the African Risk Capacity. My last point, ladies and gentlemen, is about locally led actions. Coming from a country with a federal system, we in Switzerland are keenly aware of the importance of local action and the principle of subsidiarity when it comes to implementing adaptation and mitigation projects in fragile countries. Experience has shown, and DG Antonio Vitorina has just confirmed, that local action works best in an inclusive and participatory way. This includes the participation of women and youth, as well as vulnerable groups. The future Loss and Damage Fund could therefore explore ways, perhaps through multilateral partners, to directly support locally led action. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are looking forward to continuing this important conversation in the coming weeks and to finding ways to accelerate climate action in fragile and conflict-affected states as we're approaching the COP28 and the Relief, Recovery and Peace Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I call upon our youth delegate, Mr. Lamy Bess. I give you the floor. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, if I'm here today, it's mainly because I'm a delegate from Senegal and part of the International Youth Climate Delegate Program, the largest initiative of its kind to expand youth participation in the international climate negotiation processes to date, providing robust capacity building for 100 young delegates and fully funding them to attend COP28 as well as other milestones in the climate negotiation process. I'm taking this opportunity to thank the COP28 presidency and COP28 Youth Climate Champion in partnership with YUNGA, the official children in youth constituency of the UNFCCC. Aligning with this particular topic, the UNDP alongside with the COP28 team organized last June 23rd a dialogue on children and youth, peace and climate security with substantive takeaways to consider with a guidance note that is being developed right now. But when it comes to climate security, we cannot exclude youth in the whole process. Youth are incoming leaders and have to be in the forefront and the core of such topics, which contribution, I strongly believe, are a crucial part in a pathway towards inclusion and just equitable and sustainable future. With my work as a founder of the Climate Diary, educating children and youth about climate change, we are developing materials in regards to climate peace and security, and I'm very looking forward to collaborate and partner with anyone that believes in solving this issue with youth-led organization. Addressing critical needs faced by countries and communities affected by extreme climate vulnerability, fragility, or conflict is a complex and multifaceted challenge that requires a combination of strategy and approaches. We can bank on a few ideas such as early warning systems, climate finance, adaptive governance, education, and awareness. Last but not least, I believe it's a critical moment to take action to maximize access to climate finance for the adaptation and avail the finance for addressing loss and damage. The loss and damage needs to be a new, additional, accessible, grant-based, adequate, and timely to support action to address loss and damage at the grassroots. And as a young advocate for having the opportunity to work in loss and damage, slow onset hazard, loss and damage is the current injustice for our generation. Young people, fragile and vulnerable, as well as the indigenous population, should be active stakeholders in designing solutions. At COP28, at this COP28, nations should come together to agree on operationalizing the loss and damage fund so that it can be quickly filled with resources, and then funding can start to flow to low-income, climate-vulnerable countries no later than 2025. I finish by this. All of this in partnership with youth and working closely with organizations such as YOUNGO, the Youth Climate Champion Team, Loss Damage Youth Coalition, Climate Dev, the Climate Diary, to contribute with key inputs and ensure an inclusive approach for equitable and sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Whoever said the young don't listen to instructions? I call upon the Deputy Minister of Environment of Slovenia. Thank you very much. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, much has already been said, especially on finance, where it's difficult to add additional arguments to highlight the importance of truly finding workable systemic solutions for mobilizing finance, channeling it where it's most needed, and also using it most effectively. But allow me to shed light on some three additional aspects to reducing fragility that we find important. The first is the context of international, or rather even regional cooperation. Since climate and weather know no borders, international cooperation may be the only way to effectively address climate and weather-related challenges, but it may also provide a fora for the necessary exchange of expertise and practices and offer better solutions. Our country, Slovenia, in this regard, is supporting Eastern Europe and Western Balkans area by hosting the International Sava River Basin Commission's flood forecasting and warning system, as well as the Southeast European Drought Management Center. We're also actively supporting the World Meteorological Organization in establishing a Southeast European multi-hazard early warning advisory system. The second aspect I'd like to raise is the importance of an inclusive and multi-stakeholder approach. So strengthening the resilience to climate and crisis is a society-wide challenge, and it demands the cooperation of various actors. So their involvement in programming and planning climate adaptation is crucial to ensure success. And thirdly, I'd like as well to raise the importance of awareness raising of the challenges of climate action in fragile contexts, such as today's event, but also other aspects. We as well, as members of the UN Security Council in the 24-25 term, we will also devote special attention to climate peace and security and water security agendas as well. So in all of this regard, I would like to thank the organizers, hosts for today's event, also the COP28 presidency for the first ever Peace Day on the agenda of the COP, and I have to conclude by mentioning that we look forward to continuing to work together with all of you to bridge the divide in climate action in vulnerable contexts.
Thank you very much. And I call upon our last two speakers. Oxfam Executive Director, followed also at the end by the Green Climate Fund Deputy Executive Director. And I thank all of you who are still in the room waiting patiently. Thank you very much, Oxfam.
Thank you. And I feel for you, so I'll try and do it less than 3 minutes. So thank you. Delighted to be here. And in the last 1 week, we've heard the phrase polycrisis again and again. I think it's time to turn the gaze to re-look at the polycrisis. It's essentially a massive humanitarian crisis which has poly-manifestations. And I just wanted to kind of, and that's obviously the climate crisis, the food crisis, the growing inequality crisis, the backsliding of democracy. I think it's critical at this moment that we try and look at a financial architecture which looks at the spectrum of climate financing, development financing, peace, humanitarian financing as one, and then start looking at coordination. So that's really one meta point that I was hoping that we can look at. A particular request for COP28. In 2016, the high-level panel for humanitarian funding did the grand bargain between the big donors and humanitarian organizations to address the humanitarian financing gap. I think now what we need is the green bargain, which is essentially looking at climate finance mechanisms and humanitarian donors. How do they come together, coordinate to respond to the needs of people? Let me now just make three very specific short requests. One, we need to support small community level funding opportunities that are flexible and based on no regrets approach to risk. The second, create fora for information sharing and best practices that will enhance place-specific anticipatory action, ensure that local actors are genuinely supported, and prevent the transfer of risk. And finally, improved collaboration between the humanitarian and climate sectors require an increased focus on understanding and knowledge exchange. So those are the three big ones, but I really hope the COP28 takes us, have audacious ambition. This cannot continue, and we need to fundamentally change the path of where we are headed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Henry Gonzalez, you have the final word. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comforting. What a challenge to be the last one. I don't know whether to say ditto to everything that has been said, and that's it, or I'm going to take my 3 minutes and try to close by summarizing on the three topics that you, Comfort, mentioned: finance, programming, and collaboration. The Green Climate Fund is a country-driven fund. We work with countries, and we are a partnership organization where we have a plethora of partners that go from the civil society, governments, and private sector. We have been programming for the past 8 years, and we've got $13 billion already committed, and we've been able to crowd in public and private resources for a total portfolio of $50 billion. As we're starting our next programming, we realize that while there's already a track record, there's still a lot to be done. And we hear you, Minister from the Marshall Islands, and others who have said, how do we simplify access? And how do we make access something that does not become a burden on bureaucratic procedures, but rather that we keep anchored on the mission? And we are going to try to do that even better in our next programming cycle that starts in 2024. Our new executive director, Mafalda Duarte, gave her vision yesterday, where she has really called on ambition. And here, I'm also very pleased to know that several of you have announced your pledges to the Green Climate Fund. I'd like to thank Slovakia, Slovenia, France, Luxembourg, and Spain, who used the Climate Ambition Summit to announce. Now, on programming, it is clear that GCF has a mandate to have an equal distribution between adaptation and mitigation on grant equivalency. And it is in adaptation where we could work a lot closer to fragile states. We've already been working on a few, but we need to improve. And as a learning organization, we may need to develop policies that provide more flexibility to program in these areas that might not be able to use our one-size-fits-all, but actually fit for purpose, as the gentleman from the youth community has expressed. Lastly, on collaboration. This is a fragmented space, both in financing as well as in humanitarian programming. How do we really create coherence and collaboration? We're going to use the opportunity at COP28, Madam Minister, to actually host for the first time a pavilion with all the climate funds. Jeff, Adaptation Fund, CIF, and GCF will try to show and signal that we need to work together to really reach those that need us the most and really deliver on the mission. Thank you very much.
Madam Excellency, I think you'll agree that that's a really great note that goes directly to the pact in which you have launched here today. And I want to attach myself to an important point that Martin Griffiths made, which is to say that climate promises don't seem to lead to climate expenditure. So it's not just a matter of increasing the money, but making sure the money gets to the people who need it as well. And I want to remind you all, as we enter into COP28, you, Madam, Your Excellency, your government have really put forward a very innovative initiative, because at COP this year, the UAE will launch the inaugural Relief, Recovery and Peace Day at Dubai, and it really is a testimony to the innovation and your commitment to making sure that the link between climate and conflict and fragile affected states are really brought together at the COP. On behalf of everybody that was here, I'd like to thank you and your co-hosts for allowing everybody to associate themselves to the good work that you're doing, and look forward to seeing, if not, but most of you in Dubai, and to continue the good work that we've started today here. Thank you very much, Madam Excellency. Thank you.